All right. I wanted to look at some views on nationalism today. So there doesn't seem to be any sense of positive nationalism. It's all the rise of nationalism. Is this Now This, like a different version of Now This? I'll watch this first.
The secret to amazing hair? Dove believes you get amazing results when you get the details right. That's why new Dove Hair Therapy range has selected ingredients so potent they instantly nourish damaged hair at a cellular level. 100% smoother hair after first use.
In 2017, Donald Trump took office in the United States. President Erdogan consolidated his power in Turkey, and 60,000 people marched in the streets of Poland calling for a white Europe. What we're seeing is a wave of nationalism, what some are calling the new nationalism, ripple around.
Hold on now this. Say that again.
Donald Trump took office in the United States. President Erdogan consolidated his power in Turkey, and 60,000 people marched in the streets of Poland calling for a white Europe. What we're seeing is a wave of nationalism.
That's a very broad use of the term. Let's rewind here. What is nationalism? Let's look at some definitions. Let's look on Wikipedia, Danica, Merriam-Webster. Here we go. I got this fancy new text-to-speech.
Nationalism is an idea and movement that promotes the interests of a particular nation, as in a group of people, especially with the aim of gaining and maintaining the nation's sovereignty, self-governance over its home. Nationalism is an idea and movement that promotes the interests of a particular nation, as in a group of people, especially with the aim of gaining and maintaining the nation's sovereignty, self-governance over its homeland.
Yo, that voice is kind of harsh, man. Let's see if I can change that. What else you got for me in here, buddy? Maybe the English.
Hi, I can read web pages or
Hi, I can read web pages or documents for you.
Hi, I can read web pages or documents for you.
Hi, I can read web Hi, I can read web pages or documents
The tone
for you.
of this one is just like...
Hi, I can read web pages or documents for you.
I'm gonna go with this guy. He sounds like he knows what he's doing. Shit.
Nationalism is an idea and movement that promotes
Much
the
better.
interests of a particular nation, as in a group of people, especially with the aim of gaining and maintaining the nation's sovereignty, self-governance, over its homeland.
Interests of a particular nation, as in group of people. Well, that's two different things. That could be an intentional segregation of a group of people, whether it's people who like a certain thing, people who are different physical attributes. Very broad.
Nationalism holds that each nation should govern itself, free from outside interference, self-determination, that a nation is a natural and ideal basis for a polity, and that the nation is the only rightful source of political power, popular sovereignty.
Each nation should govern itself, free from outside interference. Okay. And a nation is a natural and ideal basis for a polity. Polity. Polity is an indefinable political entity, any group of people who have collective identity, who are organized by some form of institutionalized social relations and have a capacity to mobilize resources.
It further aims to build and maintain a single national identity, based on shared social characteristics of culture, ethnicity, geographic location, language, politics, or the government, religion, traditions and belief in a shared singular history, and to promote national unity or solidarity. Nationalism seeks to preserve and foster a nation's traditional cultures and...
So, okay, the things are so broad here in a nationalism definition, according to Wikipedia, or in general. So, well, I guess the interpretations of is this good or bad vary so much. For example, is having your own language and prioritizing and maintaining that language, saying this is going to be our language and that's it. Or if you want to communicate in a social, like political setting, you must use this language. That could be seen as like totally benign, because you could be saying, well, that's being considerate to the native people who don't know whatever outside language. So it could be totally benign like that. Or you could say, even with religion, that could be benign. It could just be saying we want to maintain like whatever religion you have in that area. But the non-benign part would be saying something like, your religion, you can't practice your religion here because this is the dominant religion and we don't want any other religions. So it could be like the things that differentiate them are like one has a stubbornness to maintain and impose on the other people. Whereas you could have, I just prefer this and I prefer my native religion and I'd like you to be a part of that. So it's like even in that example, it's like you could interpret one as like bad, or you could just go to the extreme and be like, well, you can't practice your religion at all here because this is the dominant religion, nationalism. So I think the important factor is you have to be really specific within each group of these, or just, whatever that would define nationalism.
It further aims to build and maintain a single national identity, based on shared social characteristics of culture, ethnicity, geographic location, language, politics, or the government, religion, traditions and belief in a shared singular history, and to promote national unity or solidarity.
A shared singular history. See, that could also be interpreted as good or bad, because on the one side you could say, well, there's so many facets of that. So it's like you could have a fact-based history, as in these events happened, and this is proof that it happened. You could have that plus omission. So you could have this happened, we can prove this happened. We're not telling you these good and bad things that revolved around this. The singular history could be in a false perspective, so that they're saying this is what happened, we can't prove that it happened, or this is what happened, we can't prove that it happened, and third parties can prove that that never happened, and that's a lie. So again, specifics are really important, because saying this alone could in practice and in theory be good, or in the same regard be bad or mix. It doesn't inherently mean these attributes describing nationalism or adjectives are inherently bad. That could actually be inherently good. If your definition of singular history is this is what happened factually, here's the proof to back it up, and we include things that we haven't thought about or discovered in history.
Nationalism seeks to preserve and foster a nation's traditional cultures, and cultural revivals have been associated with nationalist movements. It also encourages Nationalism seeks to preserve and foster a nation's traditional cultures, and cultural revivals have been associated with nationalist movements. It also encourages pride in national achievements and is closely linked to patriotism. Nationalism is often combined with other ideologies such as conservatism, national conservatism, or socialism, left-wing nationalism.
Left-wing nationalism. Okay, I see. Okay, that's Wikipedia. Broad definition. Read it to me.
Nationalism. Nationalism, ideology based on the premise that the individual's loyalty and devotion to the nation-state surpass other individual or group interests. Questions. What is nationalism?
You've done enough for me.
Definition of nationalism. A sense of national consciousness, see consciousness sense 1c, exalting one nation above all others and placing primary emphasis on promotion of its culture and interests as opposed to those of other nations or supranational groups.
That's an interesting way of putting it. National consciousness. It's kind of neat. But these definitions are like more broad than Wikipedia. I feel like Wikipedia is just a bunch of... Wikipedia can be good or bad. So let's read this one again. After reading that.
Nationalism is an idea and movement that promotes the interests of a particular nation, as in a group of people, especially with the aim of gaining and maintaining the nation's sovereignty, self-governance, over its homeland.
Okay, I feel like... this is just like random observation. I feel like right away, because Wikipedia goes, okay, maybe in depth or on, let's just say in depth, it kind of opens it up to be interpreted as a bad thing. Whereas reading this one, nationalism, ideology based on the premise that the individual's loyalty and devotion to the nation state surpass other individual or group interests. I feel like there's a lot less to interpret as bad from this definition or this one. A sense of national consciousness, exalting one nation above all others and placing primary emphasis on promotion of its culture and interests as opposed to those of other nations or supranational supranational.
Nationalism holds that each nation should govern itself, free from outside interference, self-determination, that a nation is a natural and ideal basis for a polity and that the nation is the only rightful source of political power, popular sovereignty. It further aims to build and maintain a single national identity, based on shared social characteristics of culture, ethnicity, geographic location, language, politics, or the government, religion, traditions and belief in a shared singular history, and to promote national unity or solidarity. Nationalism seeks to preserve and foster a nation's traditional cultures, and cultural revivals have been associated with nationalist movements. It also encourages pride in national achievements and is closely linked to patriotism. Nationalism is often combined with other ideologies such as conservatism, national conservatism, or socialism.
Yeah, there's a lot you could, a lot of words with like maybe different connotations, or is that the right word? Like you may view the word socialism, singular history, solidarity, and have like inherently bad meanings behind them. But anyway, just kind of observation between these different definitions. But, okay, good. So that gives us a decent platform of what nationalism is, what it can be, what's linked to it. So let's listen to this again.
In 2017, Donald Trump took office in the United States. President Erdogan consolidated his power in Turkey, and 60,000 people marched in the streets of Poland calling for a white Europe.
Okay.
What we're seeing is a wave of nationalism.
These are completely different things. So Trump?
2017, Donald Trump took office in the United States.
That's one
President
thing.
Erdogan consolidated his power in Turkey, and
Completely separate.
60,000 people marched in the streets of Poland calling for a white Europe.
Completely separate. I don't know who this guy is. The Trump thing could be benign. You could interpret it as benign or negative. This, I don't know. I'm going to assume it's just neutral or negative. And I'm going to assume this is just purely negative.
And calling for a white Europe. What we're seeing is a wave of nationalism, what some are calling the new nationalism.
But let's see. I'm really curious because of this channel and how she's going to describe nationalism. I'm curious. I'm going to assume that she's going to present nationalism in a bad, now that we know it can be inherently good or it can be inherently bad. It's just you have to be very specific.
Ripple around the world. In some countries, it goes all the way to the highest levels of public office, while in others, it's manifested in certain political parties making significant progress and gaining power. So we've decided to take a look back at some of the key events in a year where this was increasingly on display. In a year filled with breaking news about the presidency of Donald Trump, one of increasingly on display and gaining power. So we've decided to take a look back at some of the key events in a year where this was increasingly on display.
Okay, so they wanted to look back and just see the most prominent examples. Why? I mean, that's what they're doing. That's what they're going to do here, but why? What is your motivation?
In a year filled with breaking news about the presidency of Donald Trump, one of the most important and impactful events was the domestic terrorism attack in Charlottesville, Virginia. A man drove his car into a crowd of anti-racism protesters, killing 32-year-old Heather Heyer and injuring at least 19 other people. President Trump's response to this attack was one of the most defining parts of his presidency thus far. He defended the white nationalists who organized the event that caused the counter-protesters to be there in the first place, saying, quote, "There were very fine people on both sides." This was a telling moment because it revealed Trump knows who a core part of his base is, and that he's not willing to alienate them.
So she's saying Trump wants to appeal to...
That he's not willing to alienate them.
Oh, she sounds very, listen to the way she says this.
Part of his base is, and that he's not willing to alienate them.
She sounds very, very anxious. Like, very, like, just trying to get out tension as she talks.
Revealed Trump knows who a core part of his base is, and that he's not willing to alienate them.
And that vocal fry, right? That when you talk like this and there's no air left in your lungs. That to me is just another observation, completely independent of anything. But usually when you have people like that, they tend to focus on negative things and be inherently anxious at things, and like a classic person to misinterpret, just to be like, I want to fight this battle for justice or something.
People on both sides. This was a telling,
which is totally fine, by the way. It's totally fine. It's just like if you have that kind of energy and reaction to things, like you just want to be, because you can be wrong, but still think you're morally right, and you could still be doing a lot of wrong.
Moment because that caused the counter-protesters to be there in the first place, saying, quote, there were very fine people on both sides. This was a telling moment because it revealed Trump knows who a core part of his base is, and that he's not willing to alienate them.
Okay, so I want to look at what Trump said here, but she's saying that Trump basically deliberately said that to appeal to people, let's say, both sides of the argument, so that he doesn't alienate anyone.
Multiple studies about the 2016 election have shown that many Trump voters were in favor of his highly divisive, anti-immigrant, and anti-Muslim rhetoric. Trump campaigned on nationalism, and he's governed accordingly. He has combined his Make America Great Again slogan with policies like record-high arrests of non-criminal immigrants, a travel ban on 7 countries, including refugees, and making the U.S. the only country to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord.
Okay, we could just say this previous Trump thing.
People on both sides.
Let's just give her the favor here.
He defended the white nationalists who organized the event that caused the counter-protesters to be there in the first place, saying, quote, there were...
Oh, wait. She made a claim here that Trump defended. Okay, now I have to look into this. I just want to copy and paste that, but I can't. Shit. I think there's blame on both sides. And I have no doubt about it. That should bring it up. Whoa. What? Hold on now. They're saying the quote is, I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it. ... You also had people that were very fine people on both sides. Okay, what is this, the full transcript? Let me try and pull up a quote that's not that exact phrase, because that'll pull up literally every... I want like the actual source of this. I don't want like out of context stuff, even if it's like big chunks of it. Maybe this will tell me when it was. Tuesday, August something. It's the full thing. Oh God, this fucking quality.
Benefit.
Let me ask you why did you wait so long?
I didn't wait long. I didn't wait long. I wanted to make sure, unlike most politicians, that what I said was correct, not make a quick statement. The statement I made on Saturday, the first statement, was a fine statement, but you don't make statements that direct unless you know the fact. It takes a little while to get the facts. You still don't know the facts. And it's a very, very important process to me, and it's a very important statement. So I don't want to go quickly and just make a statement for the sake of making a political statement. I want to know the facts. If you go back to in fact, I brought it.
Who did you bring, Mr. President?
As I said on, remember this, Saturday.
So he's saying the media wants him to pass judgment immediately, and Trump is saying he doesn't want to do that, which is totally fair. That's a totally fair stance.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence. It has no place in America. And then I went on from there. Now, here's the thing. Excuse me. Take it nice and easy. Here's the thing. When I make a statement, I like to be correct. I want the facts. This event just happened. In fact, a lot of the event didn't even happen yet as we were speaking. This event just happened. Before I make a statement, I need the facts. So I don't want to rush into a statement. So making the statement when I made it was excellent. In fact, the young woman who I hear is a fantastic...
This must be a press conference after the initial response he had to the event? Maybe?
Fantastic young woman, and it was on NBC. Her mother wrote me and said through, I guess, Twitter, social media,
turn to comments off,
the nicest things, and I very much appreciated that. I hear she was a fine, really actually an incredible young woman, but her mother on Twitter thanked me for what I said. And honestly, if the press were not fake, and if it was honest, the press would have said what I said was very nice. But unlike you and unlike the media, before I make a statement, I like to know the facts.
Oh, hell yeah, man.
They don't. How about a couple of infrastructure questions?
Was that terrorism?
Say it, what?
The CEO of Walmart said you missed a critical opportunity to help bring the country together. Did you?
Not at all. I think the country, look, you take a look. I've created over 1 million jobs since I'm president. The country is booming. The stock market is setting records. We have the highest employment numbers we've ever had in the history of our country. We're doing record business. We have the highest levels of enthusiasm.
Blah, 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 blah.
So the head of WACS, unlike a lot of reporters, very important to me to get the facts out. And, excuse me.
I don't know if this is the right one.
And then you get into, I like him. Go ahead.
I'm not sure if this was the right one, dude. Because it's saying, oh, it should be on August 15th, or they were saying it was like Tuesday before August 15th or on August 15th. Let's see. Okay, so it'll be August the 13th. How long is your live stream thing? The bums.
He never takes questions, and you sort of wonder what's going on because they're not that difficult. Some can be nasty, but they're not that difficult. But he never takes questions, so he just biggest since World War II, which was just announced a little while ago today. We will not rest as we continue to work toward a world of greater harmony and prosperity for all. I want to thank Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed of the United.
Damn, it sounds tired of shit, man. It's got to be this one then. Okay, let's see what they
We want to fact check the president's statement that both sides are responsible for the violence in Charlottesville. Video.
Both sides showed up for a fight.
Not all of those people were neo-Nazis, believe me.
Okay.
Saturday's rally.
It was that one. Okay.
I never spoke to Mr. Bannon about it. Senator McCain must know what he's talking about. I will tell you something. I watched those very closely, much more closely than you people watched it. And you have, you had a group on one side that was bad, and you had a group on the other side that was also very violent. And nobody wants to say that, but I'll say it right now. You had a group on the other side that came charging in without a permit, and they were very, very violent. Go ahead.
Do you think that what you call the alt-left is the same as neo-Nazis?
Those people, all of those people, excuse me, I've condemned neo-Nazis. I've condemned many different groups, but not all of those people were neo-Nazis, believe me. Not all of those people were white supremacists by any stretch. Those people were also there because they wanted to protest the taking down of a statue, Robert E. Lee. So, excuse me, and you take a look at some of the groups and you see, and you know it if you were honest reporters, which in many cases you're not, but many of those people were there to protest the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. So, this week it's Robert E. Lee. I noticed that Stonewall Jackson's coming down. I wonder, is it George Washington next?
Okay, and here's where the people may be interpreting, or not, they may be interpreting something like this as white nationalism. Like these statues.
Next week, and is it Thomas Jefferson the week after? You know, you really do have to ask yourself, where does it stop? But they were there to protest, excuse me, you take a look the night before, they were there to protest the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. Infrastructure question, go ahead.
Should statues of Robert E. Lee stay up?
I would say that's up to a local town, community, or the federal government, depending on where it is located.
Are you against the Confederacy?
About race relations in America, and do you think things have gotten worse or better since you took office?
I think they've gotten better or the same. Look, they've been frayed for a long time, and you can ask President Obama about that because he'd make speeches about it. But I believe that the fact that I brought in, it will be soon, millions of jobs. You see where companies are going to we're fixing the inner cities, we're doing far more.
Okay, I think I've heard enough. I mean, could you interpret that as defending? Could you interpret what Trump said as defending both sides? When he said, I think the worst that you could get is that he objectively cast blame on both sides, but he still may support a side. I don't think you can take from that he defended one particular side or just didn't want to alienate them.
We're very fine people on both sides. This was a telling moment because it revealed Trump knows who a core part of his base is and that he's not willing to alienate them.
But was he trying to appeal to his base, you know, or was he just like he's already president. He's not campaigning. He doesn't need to win votes at that point. And I don't think things that he does are to win votes. Like while he was president, he just says whatever the hell he wants to say, basically, right? Like even I think both sides agreed on that. Where's the motive to pander to what she thinks of pandering to, which is white nationalism or white supremacists? Like what is his motive for that, you know? And what is the conclusion of that? Like, is he now together with these white supremacist groups? Like, I don't know, man. Like, there's so much you'd have to prove for this.
The core part of his base is, and that he's not willing to alienate them. Multiple studies about the 2016 election have shown that many Trump voters were in favor of his highly divisive, anti-immigrant, and anti-Muslim rhetoric. Trump campaigned on nationalism, and he's governed accordingly. He has combined his...
So I don't see the purpose of just pandering to that. Like, why blame them then in that case? You're trying to pander to somebody. That doesn't make sense.
His Make America Great Again slogan, with policies like record high arrests of non-criminal immigrants, a travel ban on 7 countries, including refugees, and making the U.S. the only country to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accords. Those that marched in Charlottesville actually have something in common with the tens of thousands of people who marched in Poland. They're both calling for a white America and a white Europe. Around Poland's Independence Day in November 2017, about 60,000 ultranationalists marched in Warsaw, participating in what experts call one of the biggest far-right demonstrations in Europe in years. These groups promote anti-European Union, anti-Islam policies, and these are reflected in the Polish parliament. Back in 2015, the right-wing Law and Justice Party came to power, and they currently hold the most seats in that parliament. There's a lot of debate about whether the Law and Justice Party is more right-wing populist than nationalist. The party leaders prefer to call themselves patriotic, but they specifically promote Polish and economic nationalism. Party leader Jarosław Kaczynski once said Poland can't accept any refugees because, quote, they could spread infectious diseases. What's interesting is that other leaders in Poland have pushed back against the white nationalism they see coming from the U.S. When Richard Spencer, a well-known American white nationalist, was scheduled...
Nuance. There's no nuance in the usage of nationalism. And I don't think, based on this video, I don't think this girl knows, or whoever wrote this, I don't think they know the nuance.
...to speak at a far-right conference in Poland, ministry officials pushed back and said that he was not welcome. The foreign minister said Spencer, quote, defames what happened during World War II, defames the Holocaust. That Independence Day march, by the way, also featured chants about getting Jews out of power. It shows you that there's still quite a conflict in addressing the nationalism within Poland. The debate over whether Turkey is part of Europe or Asia has been going on for decades. Under President Erdogan, at least one answer is clear. His ruling Justice and Development Party is about Turkish and at times Islamic nationalism. Turkey presents a very clear case of the connections between this new nationalism and authoritarianism. Erdogan has made Turkey an incredibly dangerous place for journalists, curtailing free speech and press freedom, especially when it comes to criticism or opposition. Thousands of people have been arrested, while certain press outlets have had their websites blocked by the government. According to the ruling party, it's all in the name of making Turkey appear unified and strong in an increasingly destabilized area. Those who support the president say they do so because he, quote, stands up to external aggressors, while others fear it's making the country increasingly isolated. One reason why nationalism has become more popular in all of these countries are the effects of globalization. Those who feel left out or left behind are turning to communities that make them feel more powerful again, but at what cost? This isn't unique to just 2017. The surprise Brexit vote in 2016 was one of the biggest.
I like the zoom in.
Feel more powerful again, but at what cost? This is
the emphasis, as in, you're gonna screw up your life if you do this.
Isn't unique to just 2017. The surprise Brexit vote in 2016 was one of the biggest indicators that a nationalist feeling was prevalent among many voters, though some actually regretted their vote the very next day. But these effects, the effects of Brexit, Trump, Erdogan, and more, are already in motion, not just in these three.
Some of them could have been ecstatic the next day. Why don't you say that too?
Countries, but in others around the world. The lasting effect will reshape the politics of many countries, though how the pendulum swings remains to be seen, and it's something that we'll continue to track into 2018. Donald Trump espouses an America First philosophy, but his decisions have consequences around the world. For a closer look at one of these decisions, his recognition of Jerusalem as the official capital of Israel, check out this video to the right. Thanks for watching. Now, the decisions have consequences around the world. For a politics of many countries, though how the pendulum swings remains to be seen, and it's something that we'll continue to track into 2018. Donald Trump espouses an America First philosophy, but his decisions have consequences around the world. For a closer look at...
So I was basically right in my assumption based on the channel and just like listening to this girl for 3 seconds. Nationalism is presented purely in a negative connotation. Let me look up this word, hold on. I can't, I think it's the right word, right? An idea or feeling that a word invokes in addition to its literal or, okay, sure. Yeah, it's all presented in a negative context and connotation. And everything is almost blended together. And like, here's an example of Trump. Here's an example of a white supremacist march with tens of thousands of people. And there's not even like, well, we can't do this because this is bad. It's just, here's all the cases and they're all blended together. You know, what is the purpose? What is the purpose of this video? It's almost like why not have any, what do you call it? Like a call to action or like an intention behind it that's relayed to the viewer. It's like, to me, it's almost like saying, okay, here's, there's cases of, let's just hypothetically say, there was this brand of gun being made, right? And this brand of gun would just automatically fire bullets like every 5 minutes and you couldn't stop it from happening. And it's almost like saying you have a video or creating a video just like this, highlighting each time that the gun went off. And, you know, like here's a case of a gun in America going off every 5 minutes. And it's just like this automaton like gun who just like, there's no controlling it. There's nothing you can do. And then here's a case in Europe where there's tens of thousands of them. They were all in the same neighborhood and they all went off at the same time. And then that's it. That's the whole video. They're like, if you want to see more of these guns and other places that they've gone off, check this video. It's very weird. Like to me, it's like an unconscious way of an unconscious call to action, highlighting something in a purely immoral fashion and not giving a call to action. It's like you feel inside of you like, oh, I have to do something about something, or wow, this is terrible, I gotta find out more. And that might not be what they're deliberately doing, but that's what it feels like to me. If I were to interpret this in the exact way that they're portraying it, and like not do all the stuff that I did, which is like look up definitions and look up like exactly what Trump said and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, kind of a crap video. I kind of agree with this rating. What's that, like a 4 out of 10? Yeah, I give it like 4 out of 10. Okay, so I mean, I kind of assume that's what the video would be like. Now, what's this? Who is CBC, the National? The good and bad that comes with the rise of nationalism. So I'm hoping this bridges a gap that was never there with this video. This was purely just the bad side of it. Let's see what this...
It's a word politicians have not always embraced, but these days, it's hard to ignore.
I'm a nationalist, okay? I'm a nationalist. Use that word.
And world leaders are now addressing it head on.
Le nationalisme en est la trahison.
French President Emmanuel Macron called nationalism a betrayal of patriotism, and our Prime Minister had similar warnings.
What? French President Emmanuel Macron called nationalism a betrayal?
Betrayal of patriotism.
Of patriotism. How? I gotta look into that. Okay. Spell. How do I get a transcript in English? All right, we gotta find a transcript of this. Here we go. Maybe this transcript. Oh, here we go. Paris for armistice commemorations. Here we go, buddy. Denied. Okay, let me make sure this is right. Read it to me.
Speech by Mr. Emmanuel Macron. I've traveled the length and breadth of French lands where the harshest battles took place. In my country I've seen the still grey and sterile earth of the battlefields. I've seen the destroyed villages which had no more inhabitants to rebuild them and which now only bear witness, stone by stone, to the folly of man. I've seen on our monuments the litany of Frenchmen's names alongside the names of foreigners who died under the French sun. I've seen where the bodies of our soldiers lie buried beneath a landscape that has become innocent again, just as I've seen where, jumbled together in mass graves, lie the bones of German and French soldiers who, one freezing winter, killed one another for a few meters of ground. The traces of that war have never been erased in the lands of France, in those of Europe and the Middle East, or in the memories of people throughout the world. Let's remember. Let's not forget. Because the memory of those sacrifices encourages us to be worthy of those who died for us, so that we could live in freedom. Let's remember, let's take away none of the purity, the idealism, the higher principles that existed in the patriotism of our elders. In those dark hours, that vision of France as a generous nation, of France as a project, of France promoting universal values, was the exact opposite of the egotism of a people who look after only their interests, because patriotism is the exact opposite of nationalism. Nationalism is a betrayal of it. In saying our interests first and who cares about the rest, you wipe out what's most valuable about a nation, what brings it alive, what leads it to greatness, and what is most important, its moral values.
Okay, I'm gonna come back to this, but
Let us, the other French people, remember what Clemenceau proclaimed on the day of victory, 100 years ago to the day, from the National Assembly rostrum. Before the Marseillaise rang out in an unparalleled chorus, France, which fought for what is right and for freedom, would always and forever be a soldier of ideals. It's those values and those virtues that sustained the people we're honoring today, those who sacrificed themselves in the fighting to which the nation and democracy had committed them. It's those values, those virtues that made them strong, because they guided their hearts. The lesson of the Great War cannot be that of resentment by one people against others, any more than it can be to forget the past. It's a rootedness that forces us to think about the...
Okay, let's go. Let me get more context here. On
November 7, 1918, when Bugle Corporal Pierre Sellier sounded the first ceasefire at around 10... On November 11, 1918, at 11 a.m., 100 years ago to the day and the hour, in Paris and throughout France, the bugles sounded and the bells of every church rang out. It was the armistice. It was the end of 4 long and terrible years of deadly fighting, and yet the armistice didn't mean peace. And in the East, for several years, appalling wars continued. Here, that same day, the French and their allies celebrated their victory. They had fought for their homelands and for freedom. To that end, they had agreed to every sacrifice and every kind of suffering. They had experienced a hell that no one can imagine. We should take a moment to remember that huge procession of...
What's up, Bateman? Armistice boy? Yeah, I'm, okay, so I was looking at some different videos for nationalism, right? Came across Now This World, went through that whole video and just the whole one-sided perspective. And then I came across this, whatever CBC is. And they were talking something, or they had a quote from Emmanuel boy. So I'm trying to get some context of what he said, because what he said was just, to me, just didn't make sense. So this was his speech, or the quote reference was from the speech of the anniversary armistice or whatever. So just reading through this.
We should take a moment to remember that huge procession of soldiers from metropolitan France and the Empire, legionnaires and Garibaldians, and foreigners who had come from all over the world because, for them, France represented everything decent in the world. Alongside the shadows of Peugeot, the first soldier to fall, and Trebuchet, the last to die for France 10 minutes before the armistice. They include the primary Chutiche Claver Dupuy, who defended Douaumont, Apollinaire, Blaise Cendres in the marching regiment of the Foreign Legion, soldiers from the Basque, Breton and Marseille regiments, Captain de Gaulle, whom nobody knew then, Julian Green the American at the door of his ambulance, Mondlant and Jono, Charles Peguy and Alan Fournier who fell in the first weeks, and Joseph Kessel who had come from Orenburg in Russia, and all the others who are ours, or rather to whom we belong and whose names we can read on every monument, from the sunny mountains of Corsica to the Alpine valleys, from Salone to the Vosges, from the Pointe du Raz to the Spanish border. Yes, a single France, rural and urban, middle class, aristocratic and working class, of all hues, where priests and anti-clericals suffered side by side and whose heroism and pain made us what we are. During those 4 years, Europe very nearly...
Okay, I get the context here. People dying, sacrifices made, people died. Yes, 10 million, 6 million, 3 million. Sure, a lot of people died, a lot of bad things happened.
The world discovered the scale of the wounds concealed by the fervor of fighting. The tears of the dying were replaced by those of the survivors, because the whole world had come to fight on French soil. Young men from every province and from overseas France, young men from Africa, the Pacific, the Americas and Asia came to die far from their families, in villages whose names they didn't even know. The millions of witnesses from every nation recounted the horror of the fight.
That's a weird way of saying they came to die. I don't think they came to die, man. I think they came to fight. Just happened to die.
The millions of witnesses from every nation recounted the horror of the fighting, the stench of the trenches, the desolation of the battlefields, the cries of the wounded in the night, and the destruction of lush landscapes until all that remained were the charred silhouettes of trees. Many of those who returned had lost the youth, their ideals, the joy of living. Many were disfigured, blind, amputated.
Makes me think of Peaky Blinders.
For a long time, winners and losers mourned equally. 1918 was 100 years ago. It seems far away. And yet it was only yesterday. I've traveled the length and breadth of French lands where the harshest battles took place. In my country I've seen the still grey.
Okay, you did a lot of stuff. You saw a lot of dead things. Very, very impacted by it. Okay, here's the meat. Here's the meat of it.
Let's remember, let's take away none of the purity, the idealism, the higher principles that existed in the patriotism of our elders.
The patriotism of our elders. Their sacrifice, okay, right.
In those dark hours, that vision of France as a generous nation, of France as a project, of France promoting universal values, was the exact...
In those dark hours, that vision of France as a generous nation, of France as a project, of France promoting universal values. What? Was
the exact opposite of the egotism of a people who look after only their interests, because patriotism is the exact opposite of nationalism. Nationalism is a betrayal of it.
Okay, first of all, that can be true. But it can also be false. And he's painting it in a way of where it's almost an absolute statement. Because of all this previous buildup, it's like he's building a case, this loose case, this like different interpretation of the past or highlighting a specific thing is all bringing it to this sort of absolute statement. Patriotism is the exact opposite of nationalism. I mean, by definition, it's definitely not. I'm sure you could think of cases of where can you even think of a case like that? It seems like it's just trying to redefine patriotism as being globalist. You know, that's really, I think that's really the message here, is to almost traditionally you would loosely categorize patriotism and nationalism as some intertwining, like almost the same, not the same thing, but they intertwine. And he's trying to like build a case for this word and then place that context onto patriotism to like separate that intertwining of the words, so that patriotism no longer means you must fight for your country. It has to be you must fight for universal values. Yeah. I think that's the motive behind this. Like all the drama before this, and then this feels like just like taking advantage of some kind of anniversary to like, it's like, yeah, you're remembering things, but then your ultimate message is like, let's remember, let me just redefine this word because of my political values. That's what it feels like to me. Like this is the core of his whole spiel here. Maybe it's not. Maybe I got to listen to more, but it felt like that was the whole case to build up to that, to separate those words. Okay, where was I? I just saw it. Wait. In saying our interests first and who cares about the rest. I don't think that's inherently what nationalism means. I think nationalism can even mean inclusivity, as in, but you can still be inclusive yet prioritize something. See, I view these kind of things as an extension of a household, right? So in your household, you wouldn't just bring in foreign languages. You'd be like, if your kid just came in, let's say you're a father and you had a kid, and they just came in and started speaking Japanese, you'd be like, I don't know Japanese. You got to speak English. On a global or a national scale, that would be seen as nationalism. But that can inherently be good. It can inherently be bad. It can be good in that you just want to interpret what other people are saying without this massive divide of people who need to learn that other language which is complicated and is more about being considerate. That person coming in and being considerate to what is already established. And that's not to say that you can't be like, hey, do you want to learn some Japanese? You know? Though that's a different thing. But it's important, like, you have to function. You have to, like, have a mutual language to function. And after the fact, you can be like, you can start, you know, like, imposing good or bad whatever your language is. So in your household, like, that's how you would view language, right? You would view maybe tradition in the same way. You'd say, like, oh, we have a 6 p.m. dinner time. You got to be here. Or we do, like, game night every 8 p.m., whatever. It's family hour, kind of stuff like that. And that's not to say that there can't be something else around that, but it's like you must be considerate to who owns and that who is native, right? Is considerate. And this is almost the opposite, where it's like I have to impose I have to be the one to be considerate. You know, like you don't walk. You don't. Okay, let's say if I spoke Japanese and I just moved into a new community, a new house, whatever. I have neighbors, let's put it that way. And I go over to their house and I'm like, hey, I'm your new neighbor. And I walk in and they invite me in. I walk in and I just start speaking Japanese. And it would be like that neighbor. They're like, oh, I have to stop speaking English. Teach me Japanese. It's like, it's like, I invited you in. You speak Japanese. Maybe let's find a way to interpret that Japanese into English. Like, you have to be considerate to that person. It's not the other way around. And that's not to say that that's like a bad thing. Or you don't even have to do that. Like, you could be open and willing to just learning the Japanese, you know? You'd be like, you can just draw a picture of an apple and be like, apple. And they'll say whatever it is in Japanese. And then you could repeat that in Japanese. And you could do that. And in any of those scenarios, you don't inherently have to say or imply that these are my interests. I don't care about your interest. I don't care about your language. You must learn my language. That's not inherent to that. That's a potential scenario. And it doesn't even have to do with nationalism. It can just be to do with like the person for whatever reason. There's so many reasons. You wipe out what's most valuable about a nation, what brings it alive, what leads it to greatness, and what's most important. It's moral values. So, I mean, is he saying it's immoral to not inherently be the one who is considerate to the other person? Like, I must learn the other person's language who's coming into my country, the country of which who has the dominant language, or just for whatever reason, that's just what they use and understand. Like, it can be immoral if you're like, I'm not gonna learn your language, and I don't want you to be here because I don't understand your language. That could be argued as immoral. I think that's where I would see it, as immoral. But none of those things these aren't inherent, and it's not. It doesn't even have to be about looking. How he says here about looking at your own interests. It can just be the consequence of the scenario could be that it's more of a pragmatic sense of where, okay, it's easier for us to teach you our native language because there's more of our language and it will do you better. And so it might actually be better for that person ultimately, you know? So to paint these scenarios as absolute and like almost inherent as being immoral, absolute as being patriotism is the opposite of nationalism is just, there's no justification for it, you know? And the fact that he's building up to like break that intertwining of nationalism and patriotism in meaning and just like in practice is just very weird, very, very weird. And it's almost like using a war and things that happened from it as like, yes, this is fact. Nationalism bad. Well, apparently to was he the president of France, Emmanuel. Yeah, apparently he thinks nationalism is bad, and it's the exact opposite of patriotism. All right, let's see what else he has to
French
say.
People, remember what Clemenceau proclaimed on the day of victory, 100 years ago to the day, from the National Assembly rostrum. Before the Marseillaise rang out in an unparalleled chorus, France, which fought for what is right and for freedom, would always and forever be a soldier of ideals. The lesson of the Great War cannot be that of resentment by one people against others, any more than it can be to forget the past. It's a rootedness that forces us to think about the future and what is essential.
I'm going to kind of jump around here.
But humiliation, the spirit of revenge and the economic and moral crisis fueled the rise of nationalism and totalitarianism. 20 years later, war came once again to devastate the paths of peace. Here today, peoples of the whole world, see just how many of your leaders are gathered on this sacred slab, the burial place of our unknown soldier.
I want to hear what he has to say about present times. I'm kind of like skipping around here.
I know, the old demons are reappearing, ready to do their work of spreading chaos and death. New ideologies are manipulating religions and advocating a contagious obscurantism. At times, history...
What? Obscurantism?
New ideologies are...
Just mean like obscuring things?
At times, history threatens to resume its tragic course and jeopardize the peace we've inherited and which we thought we had secured for good with the blood of our ancestors. So let this anniversary day be one on which there is a renewed sense of eternal loyalty to our dead. Let's again take the United Nations oath.
Sure. What is this?
Together we can break with the new treason of the intellectuals, which is at work and fuels untruths, accepts the injustice consuming our peoples and sustains extremes and present-day obscurantism.
Together we can break the new treason of the intellectuals, which is at work and fuels untruths, accepts the injustice consuming our peoples, and sustains extremes and present-day obscurantism. Let me look up this word. Opposition to the spread of knowledge, kind of like obscure. Treason of the intellectuals, accepts the injustice consuming our peoples, and sustains extremes. So, okay, let me see what he's saying before this.
Let's combine our hopes instead of pitting our fears against each other. Together, we can keep at bay these threats: global warming, poverty, hunger, disease, inequality and ignorance. We've begun this battle and can win it. Let's continue with it, because victory is possible. Together we can break with the new treason of the intellectuals, which is at work and fuels untruths, accepts the injustice consuming our peoples and sustains extremes and present-day obscurantism.
Is he saying there's groups of people who work against, let's say, established ideas by intellectuals, and in doing so, or maybe their motive is to sustain injustice, ignorance? That's some deep conspiratorial shit right there, man. I mean, well, he's saying it's kind of a new thing. Interesting. I don't know what to pull from that. I'd have to hear more from that. All right, anything else good this guy has to say? Sounds like he's going to conclude here, yep. All right, Emmanuel. So let me rewind this so we can hear this again.
It's a word politicians have not always embraced, but these days, it's hard to ignore.
I'm a nationalist, okay? I'm a nationalist. Use that word.
And world leaders are now addressing it head on.
Le nationalisme en est la trahison.
French President Emmanuel Macron called nationalism a betrayal of patriotism, and our Prime Minister had similar warnings this week.
When people feel their institutions can't protect them, they look for easy answers in populism, in nationalism.
Former Prime Minister Stephen Harper.
Say that again. Yo, can I put more words in the closed caption? I feel like it's like just one quarter of a sentence for each one. Character edge style. Oh shit.
People feel their institutions can't protect
patriotism, and our Prime Minister had similar warnings this week.
When people feel their institutions can't protect them, they look for easy answers in populism, in nationalism.
Say that again.
When people feel their institutions
can't protect them,
they look for easy answers in populism, in nationalism.
Is that kind of implying that the institution within the country is not pursuing the interest of the people within the nation? Is he kind of like unconsciously saying that? Or does he just have a different definition of nationalism, populism? All right, well, let's look up populism. Populism. Read it to me. Come on.
Populism refers to a range of political stances that emphasize the idea of the people and often juxtapose this group against the elite. The term developed in the 19th.
Is that? Let me look at this. Look at this word. Okay, so things against the establishment, opposing large business. It can be a left or right idea. Okay, so a left version of populism would be a form of like socialism, or let's say equality in pay. Everyone gets a $50 an hour no matter what. Maybe a right version of populism would be pursue the people within the nation. I guess the emphasis is on the group of people against whatever is established. So the establishment may be favoring globalism, as opposed to nationalism and the people within the country? Or the establishment maybe favoring large business and therefore against the working class? So that would be like the left and right. Okay.
Macron called nationalism a
People feel their institutions can't protect them. They look for easy answers in populism, in nationalism.
So, all right, let's think of a case where that would be something. So, like, if I lost my job, if I was discriminated against, and the institutions didn't, let's say, defend me. If I was discriminated against, maybe I don't know. Maybe I have maybe I'm just ugly, and somebody's like, I don't want you to work here because you're ugly. Now, let's say if you're like an actual discrimination, like we fired you because you were gay. If the institutions or whoever governed us didn't defend my position that I was discriminated against and it shouldn't have happened, maybe that person would then go to a populist movement of, let's say, the left, where, see, I don't know, because then you'd have to go down a rabbit hole of things. But I could see how someone could arrive there. I was just gonna create a hypothetical situation where they went to this and to that and that, and they eventually arrived at populism or nationalism. But I could see that.
Answers in populism, in nationalism.
But he's kind of just painting those words as bad.
Former Prime Minister...
my institution has failed me, therefore I'm going to rebel and join this group. That's what it feels like to me. That's what it feels like he's saying. Nationalism is an easy answer. I mean, but it could be a good answer. It could be the better answer in some cases. I don't think anything he's saying is in any way... I don't think in any way he feels that nationalism can be good or populism can be good. I don't know, maybe not. I don't know. I'd have to see the whole thing.
In nationalism.
Former Prime Minister Stephen Harper is also weighing in, calling their concerns an example of disconnected elitism.
So which one is it? And what, more importantly, are the consequences of those kinds of messages? Chantal Hébert is in Montreal tonight. Andrew Coyne is in Calgary tonight. And Andre Demise is in Toronto. Good to see everybody. Andrew, I'm going to start with you because you wrote about this week. You thought about it. We're all going to think about it now. But what, in your mind, was Macron warning against? Nationalism, something that he's seen before?
Oh.
What was he trying?
Oh, here we go. They're actually going to talk about it. Wow, nice.
To
after we already did.
Do you think?
Well, there's a kind of nationalism that we've seen in the past and in the present that's divisive, that's intolerant, that's based upon definitions of people based on their ethnicity or their race or their religion or things that are, to a great degree, immutable. And that very easily can be turned against outsiders or indeed people in their midst who don't fit that particular mold. And we are seeing that certainly in Europe, kind of an ethnic-based nationalism, certainly a nationalism that's very hostile to outside forces. We're seeing a version of that in the United States, certainly hostile to foreign treaties and alliances, and its very worst, white nationalism or racism, to give it a simpler word. So those kinds of things are certainly very worrisome. I think one has to be careful not throwing everything out together, though. There's a version of nationalism that can be quite positive. The nationalism that says, we need to widen our boundaries. We need to look past our internal differences and realize what we have in common as a nation, and directing that towards good purposes, trying to achieve great things together. That kind of nationalism, often called civic nationalism, can be a positive thing, can inspire people to very high ideals and shouldn't be dismissed lightly. So I think it's a question of differentiating between good and bad nationalism. I should also say I don't think you should just dismiss critics and critiques of nationalism as just being elitism, as Stephen Harper's trying. I think Macron was trying to make a serious and sober message.
Well, and we can talk more about why he said that or whether there's anything to that. But Chantal, is it a danger to have this existing within you, or, as Andrews points out, is there a side to it that is good and healthy and positive and something you want to see in a country?
I think it's dangerous to take a label like nationalism and decide that it's suddenly equated automatically with racism. And I think Canada, and until recently, throughout its presidencies, our countries were civic nationalism. has had pride of place, and I see no reason for that to change. But the context is really different. If you want to go to where nationalism became a more scary word in Europe post Second World War, you need to look at what happened in the former Yugoslavia. And I think that kind of poisoned the well of the word nationalism.
Right.
And then there is the rise. Don't forget, Emmanuel Macron, the French president, beat Marine Le Pen, someone who practices ethnic nationalism bordering or crossing into racism. So the context is really different.
Yeah, and he was saying those words on the 100th anniversary of the armistice, because there's a belief that, of course, that was also gave rise to the First World War and the Second World War. But he was also saying, at some belief, not just because Donald Trump was in the audience, but because of all the real dangers in Europe of these kinds of leaders as well. So, Andre, would you say that it is a danger in Canada? Whatever Macron is warning against, is there something to that here?
It can be a danger in Canada. I think when we've seen attacks from organizations like the MUD.
So they all seem very reasonable. It's kind of sad. What is the CBC? Is this Canada? Some kind of Canada, like a PBS for Canada?
We have to take that seriously. Organizations like Sons of Odin, but I take exception to the idea that what Macron said in his speech was that patriotism is the opposite of nationalism. I find that completely ridiculous. And I think part of what drives this nationalism that he's talking about is people feeling like the wool's been pulled over their eyes. When Stephen Harper refers to the elites, he's not talking about rich people like his friends. He's talking about people who occupy a high socio-political status who believe that they know better for the average person and they know for themselves. And when you say something like patriotism is the opposite of nationalism, the root word of patriotism is patrios, which is a Greek word that means fatherland. Nationalism is simply the kinship that people feel between one another within national borders, and to some extent, in an ethnic sense. And the reason.
Right. So it's like, not only is it objectively wrong, it's just a case where it's like what he said is generally going to be wrong. If you just try to even pull it from he's just trying to make a point based on where he was at, current events, it's still wrong to say.
The reason that people turn towards these ideologies is because the economic model that we have now that encourages the growth of capital, encourages the distribution and transfer of capital, but restricts the growth and distribution of people, that we can't move across geographic borders, we can't move across economic classes. When you have that kind of a restriction, they're going to turn to some very dangerous ideas, and I think that's what we're seeing.
Okay, so Andrew, I mean, talk about so that we can sort of bring it down back to earth, if we can.
Bring it down. What's your name?
Conversation.
Teresa. Your name's Teresa.
What then should people make of us of these things being bandied about practically? What does that mean for them? Is it what Andre's talking about, that people feel disconnected, left behind, falling through the cracks, as Stephen Harper sort of, I think, is trying to get at there?
Well, the germ of truth in all this critique is that when so many problems now involve transnational questions, whether you're talking about climate change or agreement on how to deal with refugees or
trade.
There's a range of these issues that now cross international borders, require a lot of international cooperation. And it's very easy to lose sight of the fact that the organizations that we're setting up that cross these international boundaries don't have a democratic mandate. Nobody elected people to the WTO, for example, that deals with world trade. So it's not completely wrong for people to say when
that's a very good point
rendered by the WTO.
Very good
cooperation.
Point. Very, very good point. Let's listen to that again.
Climate change or agreement on how to deal with
through the cracks, as Stephen Harper sort of, I think, is trying to get at there.
Well, the germ of truth in all this critique is that when so many problems now involve transnational questions, whether you're talking about climate change or agreement on how to deal with refugees or
trade.
There's a range of these issues that now cross international borders, require a lot of international cooperation. And it's very easy to lose sight of the fact that the organizations that we're setting up that cross these international boundaries don't have a democratic mandate. Nobody elected people to the WTO, for example, to deal.
Nobody elected people to the WTO. It's such a profound realization.
Deals with world trade. So it's not completely wrong for people to say when some verdict is rendered by the WTO, wait a minute, I didn't vote for them. Who are they to tell us how we can run our affairs? So
right, it's an example of an outside party. I mean, I think our president has to agree to join and then therefore agree to subsequent, let's say, regulations. But it's an example of an outside entity telling a nation, an independent nation, what to do, a sovereign nation or state.
The more ambitious we've become to try and deal with these international matters through international cooperation, the more we're running into this kind of democratic deficit question. That's not easily resolved, and it can't just be dismissed. But
so it's almost like the age-old problem of the British, like, and America, taxation without representation, right? Ideas without representation. Would that be the right, like, transfer of, that be the right kind of, like, metaphor? Regulations and ideas without representation. Like, not only on a national level are you forced to comply with some kind of, like, international trade, whatever it might be, like mandate, but it's this outside entity, which, I mean, they could just overall be right. But even the principle in itself, it's like still the sovereign nation should come down to that choice. And that making that choice within that nation and prioritizing that nation over something like the WTO should be inherently seen as bad. And it's kind of, in my opinion, it's kind of telling if somebody's like, well, you chose this nation over the interests of the world and therefore you're bad. It's kind of telling of a person who just paints that out to be nationalism, and nationalism is bad.
I come back to this point that the answer to that is not going to be withdrawing within ourselves. I think it's going to be trying to democratize our own processes as countries to try and give people more assurance that people are listening to them, that listening to their concerns. I would make one point in defense of Macron is, I think what he was getting at is the nationalism that is defensible is a nationalism that is aimed towards some kind of moral purpose that's aimed towards high ideals, to achieving things together as a nation for ourselves in our own country and for the world at large. That is easily aligned with patriotism because you're trying to do what's best for your country. When nationalism just becomes, oh, we're different, we're separate from, we don't want to have anything to do with other nations, then I think you're retreating from those moral ambitions and those high ideals.
Yeah, that's another good point. Like he almost paints those words to be almost like an extreme, or what do you call it? Like a false dichotomy, I guess. That it's only one choice, and it's the extreme choice.
And yet that seems to be what's happening in more places than just the United States, Chantal.
Yes, but in more places than the United States takes away from the core problem, which is that the United States used to have some kind of leadership on issues like that and be a model for a different kind of nationalism. This notion that all boats rise when you rise your own, and the America first, the rest of the world is looking to take advantage of us, which is the kind of discourse that you've been hearing in the U.S. From the White House, goes against the grain and takes away something a role that the U.S. since the Second World War at least had played, not always well, but had played.
So, Andre, you react to that then?
Yeah, so I think she's pointing out how after the Second World War, nationalism in America was seen as a positive, or at least that's how we functioned. I think, and that's what I think, like in recent times, it's just been like increasingly shat on.
Something a role that the U.S. since the Second World War at least had played, not always well, but had played.
So, Andre, you react to that.
I think that's fair.
Where does that leave us then?
Well, to your point, Chantal, the phrase normally goes, rising tide lifts all boats. But I think what people have been seeing, especially over the last 30, 35 years, is that the rising tide has been lifting yachts. And the failure of the center and the center left to articulate a vision for a model that gets away from people's wages and their lives being essentially stagnant while the upper class continue to get richer, while multinational corporations can, let's say, stomp through Queens and get billions of dollars in concessions when the city can't even make the trains run on time. If you can't articulate a model that's contrary to that, then they're going to turn to some very dangerous ideas.
I think what's happening in particular in recent years is this alignment of nationalism and populism. And what you've got is this very toxic brew post 9/11, post financial crisis, et cetera, where elites are in bad odor, where people, it's very, very popular now to go out and denounce elites. And when you say...
Even when you are an elite, yeah.
Well, oftentimes when you are an elite, that's right. But when the elites are also connected to these kind of international bodies, it's particularly in Europe, of course, where you've got the European Union trying to take more powers away from national governments, people pushing back against that, and they've got new fuel for their fire, if you will, post-financial crisis, and of course with the refugee crisis in Europe, where decisions are being made, I think in good faith and with the best purposes in mind, but nevertheless not necessarily always connecting to the democratic voice of the people in those countries as to how many refugees they're going to take in, et cetera. Some people are going to react badly to that, and I think that's part of what's adding fuel to this fire.
And Chantal, you can close us off on how our government then is dealing with it, given the kinds of things that Justin Trudeau was saying this week.
I think that's too tall in order for me to address, but I would just say this. I think that one of the ways that you fight this is not necessarily the central left having suddenly a vision that makes people who feel left behind feel better, but have institutions, starting with education, but others that mean that your kids, no matter how you feel, can aspire to be the elite. And I think that in Canada, for all that I've heard over the past 5 minutes, that is still possible. Part of the reason is we have kept higher education accessible, and those kind of policies, and the fact that people can partake in society and aspire to become better, I think that dream is still livable and attainable in Canada, and we do a disservice to ourselves to sit there and pretend that we have the problems of a society, for instance, like France, where it is very hard still to this day to move from one social class to another.
Okay, I gotta leave it there. Thank you, everyone. I know we just probably skimmed the surface, but you did a good job. Andrew, Chantal, and Andre, thank you.
What news organization?
The number of daily COVID-19.
CBC. This has got to be some kind of Canada public. I gotta look. I gotta see. Canadian National Television. Is it like a private organization? It's got to be. They don't have any commercials. Who is it funded by? Holy shit. Revenue, $573 million. Wow. It's not government funded. Wow. I don't know if they're generally like that, but that was a very good video. Very good video. They actually, they recognize that Emmanuel said some BS objectively, and even if you want to take his interpretation of it, it's still wrong. And where he tried to separate patriotism and nationalism, they said, wait, you can't. You can't in any context. They're going to intertwine, and your dramatic speech, you can't take that away. It seems like a good video, but I don't want to watch the whole thing. Let's see if we can skim some of it. Some good content from that. Anything in the comments section?
Hello. So welcome to this TED Dialogues, the first of a series that's really we've done in response to the current political upheaval.
Nations are fictional.
I've become quite concerned about the growing divisiveness in this country and in the world. No one's listening to each other, right? They aren't. I mean, it feels like we need a different kind of conversation, one that's based on, I don't know, on reason, listening, on understanding, on a broader context. That's at least what we're going to try in these TED Dialogues starting today. And we couldn't have anyone with us who I'd be more excited to kick this off. This is a mind right here that thinks pretty much like no one else on the planet, I would hasten to say. I'm serious. I'm serious. He synthesizes history with underlying ideas in a way that kind of takes your breath away. So Some of you will know this book, Sapiens.
You know what? Okay.
Has anyone here read Sapiens?
I'm gonna call it here, but I think we'll go back to this video. Maybe we can watch this next time. See if they have anything to add to this. It seems like it could be a good conversation. I mean, it's TED. This is from the official TED. So I'm gonna assume this has got some good content in it. So we'll come back to this. But yeah, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for checking out the video if you do. And see you guys next time.